If you think Dracula the vampire is just a legend, think again. Because amidst the desolate mountains of 15th century Romania, a real king impaled tens of thousands, leaving them to writhe in agony for days under the freezing winter sky. He didn't drink blood. He dined among the corpses, and that was just the beginning. A legend never written in books, only whispered among the forest winds, the dark night, and the scent of blood in the air. The people of Transylvania didn't speak his name after dark. They called him the Impaler, or simply, the ghost of the Carpathian peaks. If you ever wandered into the Borgo forest while mist still cloaked the ground, you might hear something echoing in the darkness. Not the sound of wild beasts, not the fall of trees, but a groan, long, lingering, as if hundreds were dying with no one to save them. The village elders swore it was the sound of the forest of stakes, where the unquiet souls of tens of thousands of victims still hung impaled in the bitter cold. And in the very heart of that forest, hidden behind ancient roots and evergreen leaves, stood Poenary Castle, the birthplace of an unending curse. Vlad Tepes, also known as Vlad III of Wallachia, wasn't a monster at first. He was a man of flesh and blood, born of fire, blood, and betrayal. But history has a way of molding children into demons when they grow up without being taught what compassion is. His father, Vlad II Dracula, was a member of the Order of the Dragon, a secret society sworn to the Pope to fight the Muslims. He was a warrior, a schemer, and a man who sold his sons to the enemy to buy a throne. Vlad and his younger brother Radu were sent to the Ottoman Empire as hostages, collateral for loyalty. During their captivity, Vlad didn't learn art, poetry, or faith. He learned to survive through hatred. Every time his brother was beaten, he remembered. Every time he was starved, he remembered. When he watched an Ottoman soldier laugh as he put hot coals to Radu's back, he stared into that man's eyes and swore, "One day, I will make the whole world groan just like that." And he kept his word. Some say Vlad was possessed by a demon. But for those who knew his story, it was clearer. He was a product of humanity itself. On a winter night in 1456, as shadows draped the northern Wallachian mountains, a lone horseman on a black steed cut through the deep snow. On his back, a long, double-edged sword, and beneath his cloak, a banner bearing a dragon, the symbol of blood, fire, and defiance. Vlad had returned, but Wallachia was no longer as it had been. The people were in turmoil. Cowardly nobles betrayed each other in turn. Foreign powers plotted invasion. No one expected him back. No one thought a child abandoned in a dungeon could reclaim a throne. But he didn't return as a king. He returned as a judgment of history. And that judgment began with blood. On the night of his coronation, instead of a feast, Vlad ordered all the nobles who had betrayed his father to assemble. Over 200 men were invited to a banquet in an old mountain castle, where red wine flowed freely and roasted meat filled the air with its aroma. As the wine began to cloud their judgment, Vlad stood, raising his goblet. "Thank you all for coming," he said, a strange smile playing on his lips. "Because tonight you won't be leaving." After those words, hundreds of soldiers stormed in, tying up each noble. No one was given an explanation. No one was asked for a reason. They were forced to carry stones, building a fortress in the forest. Those who died were left where they fell. Those who lived continued to work until exhaustion. And finally, when Poenary Castle was complete, right on the rocky mountain where an ancient pagan temple once stood, all the survivors were impaled alive and arranged to form a human fence. It wasn't a display of power. It was a greeting. Wallachia had a king, but no one dared call him a man. Vlad didn't rule from a throne. He ruled from fear. And every groan in the forest, that was the anthem of his new reign. Before he became the symbol of blood and stakes, Vlad was just a child, thin, with eyes as sharp as blades, but a gaze that always trembled as if it had seen things a child should not see. When Vlad was 11, his father, Vlad II Dracula, was forced to send his two sons, Vlad and Radu, to Constantinople as hostages to the Ottoman Empire. That was the price to keep the Wallachian throne, and he paid it with his own flesh and blood. No tears, no goodbyes, just a cold remark before riding away. Be a man or be a tool. And then his father's silhouette disappeared into the white snow, leaving two children, hands bound, escorted into enemy territory. From then on, Vlad was no longer a person. The city of Edirne, the capital of the Ottoman Empire, was a dreamlike splendor for nobles but a sweet prison for those under house arrest. While Radu, his younger brother, gradually softened under the palace's indulgence and glamour, Vlad whispered to himself every night, "This is not home. This is where you learn to kill emotion." He was locked in a small underground room, stone walls weeping water and light flickering only through a small opening in the ceiling. His daily meals were just dry bread and cold water. But it wasn't hunger that changed Vlad, it was the lessons taught in silence. He learned to read the expressions of his jailers. Knew when a whip was coming. Knew when to feign submission to avoid a near-fatal beating. Every night, he scratched a mark into the stone wall, both to count the days and to remember every face that had made him suffer. On a moonless night, he heard groans from the next room. Radu. The clinking of chains, someone crying. Then, silence. The next morning, Radu said nothing. His eyes were red-rimmed. His body stiff. From that day, Radu began to fully obey the Turks. He was given good food, fine clothes. He learned Islam and was called Radu the Handsome. But for Vlad, that was the first betrayal. Another time, an old white prisoner from Armenia was brought into the dungeon. He was a doctor, and somehow he managed to sneak Vlad a small bone knife. When a man has nothing left to lose, he whispered, "Then take everything back with blood." Vlad didn't use the knife to escape. He used it to carve the names of every traitor onto his own skin. One mark for his father. One mark for Radu. One mark for the Ottoman soldier who poured hot oil on his feet. One mark for the teacher who taught him to pray while mocking his faith. His hand, after a few years, became a bloody map of vengeance. There's a little-known story. When Vlad turned 17, an Ottoman general, curious about the eyes of the barbarian boy from the north, took him out of the dungeon, dressed him in clean clothes, and placed a newly arrived Wallachian slave before him. "This is your countryman," he sneered. "If you want freedom, kill him." Vlad didn't hesitate. He slit the countryman's throat with only a wooden spoon, then licked the blood right in the palace courtyard. The whole courtyard fell silent. The general nodded, ordered him released from the dungeon, but kept him in the palace like a rare pet. From then on, Vlad learned swordsmanship, military tactics, and politics as a re-educated noble. But no one realized he wasn't learning to submit. He was learning to take revenge. When news came that his father had been killed by rebellious Wallachian nobles and the throne given to another pro-Ottoman, Vlad remained silent for 3 days. Then he began to laugh every night, a dry, sharp laugh like a razor on a throat. He didn't cry. He didn't scream. He just dipped his finger in the blood of his meat and wrote a single word on the dungeon wall: steak. That was his vow. And it was how he wanted the world to remember him. In the winter of 1456, the Danube froze earlier than usual. The Wallachian forests were thick with fog, and lean, hungry wolves appeared near villages, like an omen of disaster. But no one knew the true disaster wouldn't come from beasts, but from the shadow on a black horse, carrying a long sword, cutting through the frost with eyes devoid of humanity. Vlad had returned. No longer the child betrayed by his father. No longer a hostage of the Ottomans. He returned like a whirlwind of fire, secretly supported by the Kingdom of Hungary and those who wished to overthrow the pro-Turkish regime in Wallachia. As soon as he set foot on the border of his homeland, he beheaded the commanding guard, even though the man had once been his father's bodyguard. "Betrayal is betrayal, whether you bow your head or kneel," he said. The man's head was impaled on a stake, placed in the middle of a snowy field, for the people to see. The time for forgiveness was over. Wallachia at that time was a shattered kingdom. Between the people and the court lay an abyss of hunger, chaos, and treachery. Nobles only plundered, soldiers robbed and murdered, peasants starved, exploited to the bone. The whole land seemed to be dying, awaiting a storm. And Vlad was that storm. He didn't beat drums. He didn't issue decrees. He just advanced silently, and each night, a noble disappeared. The next morning, they were found impaled alive before the city gates, still clutching land deeds, their mouths agape as if to speak a final word. All of Wallachia was stunned. Anyone who resisted was hanged upside down on the ramparts, bleeding to death. No one called Vlad king. They called him Kazikli Bey, the lord of the impaler. One day, an Ottoman envoy came to meet Vlad, carrying a friendly letter from the Sultan. By custom, the envoy did not remove his turban when greeting a foreign king. But Vlad didn't care for customs. He looked straight into the man's eyes and asked, "You won't remove your turban?" "No," the envoy said. "It is our sacred tradition." Vlad nodded, smiled. Then I will help you keep it forever." Immediately, his soldiers nailed the turban to the envoy's skull with iron spikes, then impaled him on a stake in the town square, his blood staining the snow red. The diplomatic letter remained in the victim's hand, soaked in blood as a symbol of the coming war between two worlds, reason and madness. Vlad didn't rule by law. He ruled by bloody example. And no one dared take a wrong step. When a wife complained to him that her husband was a lazy drunk, Vlad ordered a cauldron of hot oil, threw the man in, then turned to the wife and said, "Now you can choose someone else, or learn how to make a better man yourself." To beggars, he threw a grand feast, inviting everyone into a sealed wooden room. As everyone was happily eating and drinking, he ordered the doors locked and set the room on fire. "I was only helping them escape poverty," he coldly declared. But what made the people both fear and obey him was his insane justice. Once, a foreign merchant came to the capital, Targovist. He left his purse in the market, and when he returned, it was intact, missing only one gold coin. Vlad heard of it and ordered an investigation all night. The next morning, the thief was impaled and the purse was returned with an extra coin. When the merchant asked why, Vlad replied, "If one more coin had been missing, I would have had to impale you for slandering my people." The wolves vanished from the forests. Thieves left the city. Priests began to flee Wallachia in the night. Everyone understood. The darkness was no longer the most terrifying thing. In the dungeon of Poenary Castle, now rebuilt with stone, blood, and bones, Vlad sat alone each night, before a map of the country drawn with the veins of traitors. He didn't sleep. He didn't need to sleep, because the groans from the forest of stakes were the lullaby for his soul every night. No one knows why Vlad chose impalement as his primary method of execution. Some historians say it was a custom learned from the Ottomans. Others claim it was a childhood trauma, witnessing bodies hanged upside down in captivity. But folklore believes Dracula didn't just want to kill, he wanted the pain to last like a symphony of death. The stake wasn't just a piece of wood. It was a morbid art. He ordered lumberjacks to select chestnut or oak trees, wood that was both hard and flexible. The stakes had to be hand-sharpened, but the tip not too sharp. The reason? Because if too sharp, the victim would die quickly. And Vlad hated quickness. Before execution, his soldiers would grease or lard the tip of the stake, then tie the victim with ropes, slowly lowering them down, piercing through the anus or vagina, straight up through the abdomen, chest, sometimes even through the mouth or eyes. If lucky, the stake would only pierce the chest, keeping the person alive for a few more hours. If skilled, the victim could writhe for 3 days straight before dying. He didn't execute in secret. He erected stakes at every city entrance, around the castle, along the Danube, forming forests of impaled humans, terrifying all enemies from afar. The stench of rotting blood permeated the wind. Black crows picked at corpses from dawn to dusk. Screams echoed all night long, and Vlad called it the bloody symphony of the new kingdom. One June morning, over 20,000 impaled bodies lined the roads. Turks, prisoners, criminals, thieves, prostitutes, even children. A Hungarian envoy passing by had to cover his nose, his face pale. He turned back, asking only one question: "Why? Why must you do this?" Vlad just looked towards the red dawn sky, softly replying, "Because no one dares repeat a sin when they see the price to pay." Once, a group of Transylvanian nobles conspired to assassinate him. Upon discovery, Vlad didn't execute them individually. He led them to a barren field where hundreds of sharpened stakes had already been erected. Each person was stripped naked, their skin torn with iron tongs, then slowly lowered onto a stake amidst screams and pleas. But Vlad didn't look at them. He turned his face away, eating an apple, and ordered a blind musician to play the flute throughout the execution. Music, he said, helps their souls be lighter. One time, in a snowstorm, a fisherwoman was caught stealing bread. He didn't kill her immediately. He made her wear a white dress, stand and dance amidst the forest of stakes while trembling corpses surrounded her. He sat there, drinking wine, watching. When she collapsed from exhaustion, he ordered, "Impale her on the tallest stake, so she can see the whole view before she dies." Traitors, cheats, even those who spoke ill behind his back could be impaled. No trial needed. No law needed. The stake was Vlad's justice. The rich did not escape. The poor did not escape. Sometimes even villagers would tie each other up and turn them in to avoid suspicion. Everyone lived like walking corpses, without emotion, without opinion. Everyone looked down. because anyone who looked up could be next. The people said. Some nights, Vlad would wander the city, alone, his cloak drenched in dew. He would stop at any house, sit down, eat dinner, and ask, "Do you love Wallachia?" If the answer was yes, he moved on. If they hesitated, the next morning another stake would appear. In the diary of a German merchant, there is a passage. I traveled through his land. The whole place was dead. No birds, no people, no laughter. Only the smell of blood, flies buzzing, and thousands of corpses dangling on stakes. Some were still alive, trembling. I vomited in the middle of the road. But when I looked up, I saw him standing there, on the hilltop, not speaking, not smiling, just looking at me, as if waiting to see if I dared turn back again. The stake was not just a tool. The stake was a message. And Wallachia understood this was no longer the land of the living, but a limbo between life and death, where every mistaken glance could be buried on a sharpened tip. When the sun set behind the Carpathians, Wallachia became unusually quiet. No barking dogs, no howling wind, only the smell of burning flesh and diluted blood mingled with the fog. That's when Dracula held his feast. No one knows exactly how many blood banquets were held, but there are accounts from survivors or his soldiers that suggest the truth was more terrifying than a nightmare. In the courtyard of Poenary Castle, Dracula had a long table made of black oak, carved with human bones and inlaid with the fingernails of criminals. The table was covered with white cloth, but soon it would be stained red with blood. Around the table was a circle of sharpened stakes where agonizing victims were erected, heads bowed, blood dripping onto the grass, limbs twitching. They were still alive, still groaning. And that was the soundtrack to Dracula's meal. He sat in the center of the table, wearing a black velvet robe trimmed with red, leather gloves made of human skin on his wrists, pouring dark red wine into a goblet made from a human skull. Each sip of wine flowed over his lips like blood, and he drank without remorse, without blinking. His plate contained no bread or soup. It held human tongues, hearts sliced in half, livers seasoned with herbs, and sometimes dried human skin rolled up like spring rolls. Once, on a winter night, he hosted a feast for all the remaining nobles, those who had bowed in submission after the purge. They came in lavish ceremonial attire, bringing offerings of gold and silver. Dracula smiled, welcoming them with strong wine and roasted meat. He asked each one, "Are you loyal?" "Yes, my lord." "Have you ever betrayed?" "Never, my lord." Dracula nodded, signaling his soldiers. A soldier brought out a silver platter, on it the head of another noble, eyes still open. Then he raised an eyebrow. Why does his head claim otherwise? The wine feast immediately turned into a blood banquet. More than 30 nobles were impaled right in the courtyard amidst the sound of flutes and the rich scent of wine. The remaining guests were forced to continue eating amidst the screams or be next. A record from a surviving German missionary recounted. I saw him slit a man's throat, catch the blood in a bowl, then dip bread into it and eat. His eyes had no light of a soul, only satisfaction, as if he were enjoying a family soup. He didn't just eat, he savored. While eating, he listened to every groan, as if each cry of pain made the dish richer. Once, a soldier asked why he didn't kill them before feasting. Vlad smiled. The best food is when it knows it's slowly dying. One time, he arranged a dance among the dead. A beautiful dancer, captured from a traveling troupe, was dressed in a white gown, forced to dance amidst the agonizing corpses. Lanterns shone from the four corners of the courtyard, clearly illuminating every bloodstain on the snow. Each time she stopped from exhaustion, soldiers would cut a thigh from a nearby victim, pouring the blood over her hair like perfume. Dracula never took his eyes off her. When the music ended, he stood up, approached the girl, lifted her chin, and said, "Tonight, you are the queen." Then he plunged a short knife into her heart, smearing the blood on his forehead like a holy sign. Even when a feast was just for him, Dracula maintained the ritual. He placed 2 goblets of wine, one for himself, one for his guest, often a still warm corpse. He talked, raised his glass, even laughed. No one dared ask with whom. Some said he spoke with spirits. Others said he spoke with the devil himself. And then, there were feasts that never ended, because the victims remained alive, because the bodies still twitched, because the pain refused to subside. Soldiers reported that after clearing the banquet ground, they had to pry the hands of the impaled victims from the ground, for they had clawed at the earth and stones all night with their fingernails, as if still wanting to escape. Blood flowed into puddles, mixing with wine, making it impossible to distinguish between the drink and the sin. The blood feast wasn't spontaneous. It was a ritual. It was pleasure. It was the supreme power of a king who needed no love, no worship, only perpetual fear. In the 15th century, a king needed more than just an army. He needed to be recognized by God. And if God didn't recognize him, then at least don't go against him. But for Vlad Dracula, that meant nothing. Because in his eyes, God had long been dead, dead in an Ottoman dungeon, dead with the cries of his brother Radu, dead with the cold gaze of the father who had abandoned him to his fate. And once God dies in a man's heart, what replaces him is blood. From the early days of his reign, Vlad showed absolute contempt for the church. Not because he was an atheist, but because he viewed faith as a religious sham, something used to baptize corrupt nobles and legitimize crimes with prayers. Once, 3 priests from the West came to preach in the market. They preached about compassion, forgiveness, and condemned the immoral acts of the government. They hadn't even finished their sermon when Dracula appeared silently without warning. He said nothing. He simply gestured. The 3 priests were stripped of their vestments, tied to inverted crosses, and nailed to the wall of the main church in Targovist. Blood flowed across the altar, mixing with the communion wine yet to be used. When the villagers gathered, he stood in the churchyard, holding a blood-soaked Bible, and read aloud, "They say, turn the other cheek. But I say, stab the throat of your offender." On a cold, rainy night, Dracula invited 10 Franciscan monks to his castle. They thought they would be blessed. But upon entering the great hall, they saw torn biblical scrolls hanging on the walls and paintings of Christ slashed across the face. On the table were wine, meat, and 2 human heads on silver platters. Dracula invited them to sit, saying, "I wish to confess. Will you listen?" The head monk nodded. He said, "No matter how great your sins, God will forgive." Dracula smiled. "Then forgive this." Immediately after, his soldiers cut out the tongue of each monk, then burned them alive right in the castle's own biblical library. Their ashes were scattered over the church roof like a form of eternal, unredeemed remains. He didn't stop at killing. He created his own religion. In Poenary Castle, he had a stone vault built, where the walls were carved with curses, and in the center was a blood altar, where each week, he personally cut the hands of his loyal soldiers, letting their blood drip into a goblet. Then he drank it and said, "This is the holy wine of power." No one dared refuse. Anyone who refused was hanged upside down on a heated iron cross until blood flowed backward from their nose to their eyes. When the Vatican learned of this, a delegation of cardinals was sent to inspect the moral governance of Vlad. But before the delegation could set foot in Poenary, 9 of them disappeared. A few days later, at the gate of Targovist, the people discovered 9 inverted crosses, each impaling a cardinal, their vestments stitched to their flesh with bronze needles. Holy blood flowed into puddles, and in the center was a stone tablet inscribed, "This is the God of blood, who needs no heaven and fears no hell." For Vlad, faith was weakness. He once said, "Who needs God when you can command death? Who needs heaven when you can turn hell into a throne?" There was an old priest, secretly kept by the villagers to pray. When discovered, Vlad didn't kill him immediately. He made him hang a crucifix around his neck, then ordered, "Go throughout the city preaching about God's love with a noose tied around your neck." And each time he prayed, the noose tightened a little more. On the 3rd day, he choked to death while reciting, "Hallowed be thy name." The horror isn't that Vlad hated God. It's that he wanted to replace God. In his bedroom hung a painting. Dracula crowned with gold, sitting on a throne of corpses, 2 angels kneeling, and above his head, not a halo, but a crown of thorns soaked in blood. And beneath the painting was a Latin inscription, "Ego sum Deus mortis." I am the god of death. In 1476, snow fell early on Wallachia. The sky was ash-gray. The wind blew from a strange direction, and the whole land shuddered as if about to bid farewell to an ancient power to the earth. They say that before Vlad disappeared, all the wooden stakes in Poenary Castle spontaneously split, blood flowing from their hearts as if they were alive. Wolves howled all night, not from hunger but from fear. And in the darkness, guards saw the shadow of a man walking around the castle courtyard, a shadow without a head. That was the night Dracula vanished. The official court story says Vlad Dracula died in battle leading his last campaign against the Ottoman army at Snagov. His body was brought back and buried in an ancient monastery on a small island in the lake. But no one saw the body. No one witnessed the burial ceremony. And when scholars excavated the tomb in the 19th century, they found nothing but animal bones and a blood-soaked cloak. So did Vlad truly die? Or did he never leave Wallachia? An old soldier who survived the Battle of Snagov recounted, when he was surrounded, instead of fleeing, he killed his horse, used its blood to draw a circle around himself. He laughed loudly, saying, "If I cannot win, then I will not let this land be at peace." And then the sky thundered, no rain, only drops of blood fell from the dark clouds. When we returned, the circle of blood was blazing. No one saw him again. Some soldiers swore they saw Vlad walk into the forest, blood streaming down his body, eyes glowing like two embers, then dissolve into the fog. From then on, no one dared enter the Snagov forest. They called it the forest without end, where time stood still and whoever entered would return with white hair and empty eyes. News of Vlad's death did not bring joy. On the contrary, it sowed immense disarray. Because when a demon is alive, one can kill it. But when it disappears, leaving nothing, one can only wait for its return. And then he truly returned. Not in flesh, but through curses that lived longer than history. A year after his official death, guards at Targovist Fortress disappeared every night. Guard lights went out even without wind. Blood appeared on the castle walls, dripping into letters, "I am not dead." People began to hear hooves galloping at midnight, but when they went outside, they only saw charred hoof prints on the ground. Sharpened stakes emerged from the earth, oozing blood, planted by no one. In a fishing village near Lake Snagov, one night all the fish in the nets floated to the surface, headless. On the boat was a letter written in blood, "No one shall forget the name Vlad." The church tried to erase his traces. They smashed paintings, destroyed texts, demolished the false tomb at Snagov. But that only nourished the legend. He was no longer a man. He was a symbol. A shadow. A story parents whispered to their children at night, "If you lie, Vlad will come, impale you on a stake. If you don't listen, a stake will grow from under your bed." Those who were power-hungry, hypocritical, or committed wrongdoing often dreamed of a stake piercing their belly, then woke up in a cold sweat, even if they had never set foot in Wallachia in real life. A Western scholar once visited Snagov to research the real Dracula. He took photos, measurements, wrote books. But upon returning to England, he went completely insane. All he could utter were two words, Kazikli Bey. Kazikli Bey, Lord of the Impaler. And every night he drew impaled skulls until his hands were raw with blood. His last drawing before he committed suicide, a faceless man standing amidst a forest of corpses holding a crown of blood, at his feet, a smoldering Bible. What is the ultimate truth? Did Vlad Dracula die? Or did he just change form? The mountain people still believe that when the blood moon rises, if one says his name 3 times by the shore of Lake Snagov, they will hear the sound of hooves and see a blood-soaked stake rise from the water. They say Poenary Castle sometimes lights up at midnight, though no one lives there. There are sounds of a banquet, flutes, and someone screaming endlessly, not dying. Dracula may have disappeared from official history, but he has never left humanity's bloody memory. Because true demons don't need hell. They build hell from what was once called home. In 2023, a group of Romanian history students decided to undertake a project on Vlad the Impaler. They were not believers in legends. They believed in reason, science, and history that could be analyzed through documents. However, they never completed their thesis, because a week after they arrived in Snagov, their camera recorded something no one dared believe. A man in a black cloak, riding a black horse, passing through the forest. When lightning flashed, his face reflected the ancient portrait of Vlad Dracula himself. The video was circulated, but removed from all platforms after 6 hours. Anyone who shared it had their account locked or disappeared without a trace. One of the students, a girl named Elena, was the only one who escaped. She lives in hiding in Scotland, incommunicado. In her last diary entry, she wrote, "He doesn't live in fairy tales. He lives in blood, in war, in politics, in the cruel decisions we think are right." Dracula never disappeared. He just changed form. A history professor at the University of Bucharest, a specialist in debunking Dracula legends, was found dead in the library. His hand clutched an unpublished manuscript, Kazikli Bey, Lord of Fear. The last page was partly burned, but a readable fragment remained. "I saw him. In the mirror. Not my reflection, but him. His eyes reflected no light. Only humanity's deepest fear, uncontrolled power." The question is, if Dracula no longer exists, then why does his name still send shivers down people's spines? Why, as you read these lines, do you feel a cold wind at your neck, as if someone is watching? Why, in every nation, every dynasty, does someone like him always appear, cruel, intelligent, fearless of morality, and always ruling through fear? Perhaps Vlad didn't live as a person but reincarnated as a concept, a parasite of the mind, a part of humanity's ego. We always need a Dracula, a scholar once wrote, to blame for evil, which is actually a part of us. Legend says, if you say his name at midnight, before a mirror, and burn a page of history mentioning his name, you will hear hooves echoing in your mind. And if you look long enough into your own eyes in the mirror, what reflects back will no longer be you. In 2024, at a European History Museum exhibition, a painting was transferred from the ancient Snagov monastery to Paris for restoration. The painting depicted Vlad Dracula seated on a throne, but in the shadows behind him was a blurry, faceless figure. That night, the museum lost power. Security cameras recorded a cloaked figure passing by, but the frame immediately went to static. The painting the next morning looked different. Now, a bloody inscription appeared at the bottom edge of the painting, though no one touched it. I do not need a body to live. I live in memory, in fear, in the blood of those who believe they are masters of justice. People say Dracula loved the stake because it was a slow kill, allowing the victim to see death coming without being able to stop it. But in truth, that is how he exists. He doesn't kill immediately. He gnaws at you, little by little. Every dream, every choice you consider cruel but necessary. Each time you choose fear instead of standing up, choose brutality instead of fairness. A small part of him lives in you. Perhaps you've met him as your boss, or your leader, or your ex, or even your future self 10 years from now. Because Dracula doesn't need a body. He needs an heir. And you know what the scariest part is? You've read this far. You've thought his name in your head more than 3 times. You've imagined him. You've been thrilled. You've been scared. That means the stake has been planted, and the blood has begun to drip.